We finally get our first non-COVID affected Martinsville night race coming up on Saturday night. It's very disorienting to have Martinsville on Saturday, Richmond on Sunday. It's screwing up my brain, but regardless, I'll probably slip up and say Sunday at some point. We got a Saturday night race at Martinsville coming up this week. The Blue-Emu Maximum Pain Relief 500, a fun one from a DFS perspective because we know how we want to play things. That means stacking the front, getting those laps led in our roster, and making sure we have the proper upside to capitalize in tournaments. Let's break it down and get you set for Saturday's race. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire, here to get you set for Saturday's Blue-Emu Maximum Pain Relief 500. It is the first Saturday race of the year. We were supposed to have the heat races at Bristol 2 weeks ago. Didn't wind up having that, so this is the first time we have Saturday action for the year. Lock is at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on Saturday night. So if you are like me and tend to procrastinate, don't do it because you'll miss lock for Saturday. So again, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Saturday is when this race will lock. Make sure you have your lineup set. Thankfully, the starting order is set. There is no practice, no qualifying. So as we go through everything for today, you can fill out lineups as you go, plug in drivers who you like to pitch for, don't plug in drivers you don't like, so you can get things set right now for Saturday night's race. We're going to break down strategies for this race here in just 1 second. But first, hello, race fans. There are plenty of opportunities to play NASCAR Daily Fantasy over at FanDuel. It's like they knew what this podcast is about. Weird. This weekend, you can set a lineup of drivers for the Blue-Emu Maximum Pain Relief 500. For less than $5, you can compete for a chance to win a part of the $60,000 prize pool. First place takes home $10K. Head over to FanDuel today and set your daily fantasy NASCAR lineup. For more details, visit FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. Of course, not just NASCAR over at FanDuel right now. We've got NBA, NHL. Those are covered by Tom Vecchio on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Austin Swain getting you set for UFC. That is on Saturday. I think that's an early lock too Saturday. So check that out from Austin now as well. Post on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Our daily baseball podcast is back every weekday, recording live on YouTube at 9 a.m. and then up on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed after that. We are also doing daily Q&A shows for the MLB side of things every weekday, 4 p.m. Eastern on Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. That's what I forgot. Doing Q&As every weekday, 4 p.m. over there, talking MLB DFS. So make sure you tune in for that. But also, NASCAR going on right now. Lots of incentives to subscribe to the FanDuel YouTube page, but also the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. As always, if you like what you hear, if you win some money, leave us a rating and review because that does help us out a ton. Let's talk strategy for Saturday night. This is the race where you can just sell your soul to get more lap leaders in your lineup. This race is 500 laps long. That is tied for the longest of the year from a lap perspective, which means there are 50 points available for laps led on FanDuel. And a lot of those laps led will wind up in the perfect lineup for this race. If you look back to last year's 2 perfect lineups at Martinsville, both of them had a driver who led at least 230 laps. The average number of laps led across the 5 drivers was 365.5. So not only do you need to pin down the one guy who dominates most, but you need at least one additional lap leader in there. Like that's 36.5 FanDuel points for laps led across those perfect lineups. You're going to need at least 2, sometimes needing a third as well if you're going to compete for tournaments. Now, it can seem pretty daunting trying to pin down who will be those lap leaders, but it's actually decently easy to predict who will run out front in these tracks. If you look at the past 4 Martinsville races, 6 drivers have led more than 70 laps. 5 of those 6 had a projected average running position lower than 10.5 in my model for that race. And there are 6 drivers who meet that mark for this week. All 15 drivers who led double-digit laps had a projected average running position of 14th or better. 12 drivers meet that mark here. So the pool of drivers who could realistically lead is pretty small, and if you're putting 2 or 3 of them in each lineup, you can hit the right combos pretty easily. So it's a lot tougher to do, a lot tougher to predict those lap leaders if you use just 1. If you use 3, you're giving yourself 3 swipes at pinning down the guy who leads 230 laps, stuff like that. So I think you need a minimum of 2 lap leaders per lineup, and you should have a third and a healthy number of your lineups as well. That could lead to a top-heavy roster construction, which I'm fine with. Punting it's okay here. There's some options we'll talk about in the tier-by-tier breakdown because more drivers can realistically contend here than in a place like Atlanta. So it's not a terrible thing. I'm okay with punting. But it also increases the appeal of the mid-range. Both Martinsville lineups last year, the perfect lineups, had a driver in the 10,000 range, and they finished well. They led some laps. So if you see a driver in that 10,000 range who could lead some laps, get you a top 5 finish, the appeal in them is higher this week than usual just because there are more laps led to go around. As for the punting plays and those value plays, that's where we can allow ourselves to scoop some place differential points. Across the 10 drivers in last year's perfect lineups, 5 of them started 19th or lower. The other 5 all started inside the top 10. So you have two sources of upside here. It's starting the back and getting place differential points or starting up front and leading laps. But the priority, if you're forced to choose between the two, should be leading laps. Let's take Kyle Larson here as an example from this specific race. He's starting back in 19th, so he could get you good place differential points. But it's not a great track for him. Larson has 1 top 5 and 2 top 10s in 12 races, and that makes sense because it's a single groove track, and Larson's forte is finding the right groove, running up high, making passes that way. So he's not super likely to lead laps. He's not in that top 6 cutoff for me for guys with a top 10 projected average running position. So I'd much rather use guys like Ryan Blaney, Kyle Busch, and William Byron, who have better odds of leading laps than than Larson, even though Larson can get me place differential points. Place differential is great for value plays. You just don't want it to cost you laps led. So I think that's the way to view things here. If you're choosing between laps led and place differential for a guy who has like a higher salary, go for the laps led over the place differential. Finally, the best indicator of what to expect here will be the Phoenix race. That's the only one we have so far this year at a short flat track. And they are very different tracks. Martinsville is got these long stretches. So like it's a weird track. It's a paperclip, but it's the same rules package. So there will be some overlap between who was good there and who will be good on Saturday night. So I'm also okay looking at Phoenix, but also just in general, the 750 horsepower package tracks. That means any track that they've run since the start of last year that's 1 mile or shorter, like 1.1 miles if you want to set it on the Racing Reference Fantasy tool. If drivers have excelled in this package, we can feel good about them on Sunday because there is a lot of overlap between, even though Bristol and Dover are very different, the guys who run that well there might be more inclined to run better here as well. So to recap here, you need, even in cash games, at least 2 lap leaders per lineup. You can go 3 pretty often, and you can get there via a balanced roster and using a guy in the mid-range for your 3rd lap leader or via punting. I would go for place differential for your value plays as long as it doesn't sap you of laps led. We'll talk about some guys who could fit in that category in the tier-by-tier breakdown, and look long at Phoenix and other places with the high horsepower package to decide who will be good. I think you should be on the right foot for deciding who you want to use for this race. Speaking of that, let's go through tier by tier here, let you know which drivers I am targeting based on their salaries over at FanDuel.com. The elite tier is Martin Truex Jr. at $14,000 through Denny Hamlin at $12,500. And the top guys here to me are the logical ones. Those are the guys from up in Martinsville. They're high salary for a reason. Those guys are Martin Truex Jr. being the top play of the week, Chase Elliott and Brad Keselowski also standouts. Those are the 3 highest salary drivers on the board, but it's for a good reason. Truex has won 2 of the past 3 races here. He almost won the 3rd, but he got past the lead with 50 laps left. And then he had a loose wheel, so he didn't finish well, but a good run there. And the guy who passed him for that lead was Chase Elliott. These guys have combined to win each of the past 4 races at Martinsville. Truex and Keselowski starting in the back half of the top 10, so you'd likely want to pair them with with a guy up front to lead laps early. Elliott starting 5th, so that's not as necessary for him. I'm going to rank them Truex 1, Elliott 2, Keselowski 3, but they're all rock star level plays. I think that getting 2 of these guys in the same lineup, even if it forces you to punt elsewhere, totally okay. They are true standouts for a reason. I do like Denny Hamlin as well, but he's 4th here for me, and he's actually below some of the guys in the 2nd tier as well. So I'm probably going to be underweight on Hamlin, which stinks. I like Hamlin a lot, just not as much for this week as other weeks. So Truex 1, Elliott 2, Keselowski 3 in the upper tier. The 2nd tier on FanDuel is Joey Logano at $12,000 threw Kevin Harvick at 10,000, and this is a good tier as well, which is good if you're hunting for balance. You want to have your second lap leader being a little bit lower salaried than Truex, Elliott, and Keselowski. Part of what makes it so good is that there are two Penske drivers in this tier. That's Joey Logano and Ryan Blaney. Team Penske has been awesome in these high horsepower races since the start of last year. So if you look at Martinsville specifically, 2 races last year, they had Logano, Blaney, Keselowski. The worst finish between those 3 drivers in the 2 Martinsville races was 4th. They finished 2nd, 3rd, and 4th in both races. Blaney was runner-up both times. My model loves Logano, loves him. It has him as a top driver in the race, which I don't really agree with, but whatever. It's been better than me in the past, so whatever. It has him as the most likely winner. He's starting from the pole, so I am very good being super high on Logano for this week. And I think he's a great pairing with Truex or Keselowski because he's starting in the pole. He can lead laps early. They can lead laps late. That's a good thing. But Blaney will be a guy I try to be overweight on as well. And I think a Penske stack of Logano, Blaney, Keselowski, pretty fun. It's a little bit more balanced, so I can get behind that for this week as well. Kyle Busch is interesting at $10,500. He fits the salary mold well. I just don't know if I can convince myself he will lead laps. He did have a 7th place average running position in Martinsville last year, and the Joe Gibbs racing cars had better speed this year in Phoenix than they did last year. Truex actually won that race in Phoenix, but Busch wasn't as impressive. I like him more than Larson, who we talked about before, because he's better at Martinsville, and I'll likely have him higher than Harvick, but I'm having a hard time getting a great feel for Kyle Busch. I will use him, but I do think it's a good week to sneak a tier higher to get to Blaney and Logano instead. So to me, this tier is ranked Logano, Blaney, tier 1, Kyle Busch, tier 2 by himself, and then Larson and Harvick in tier 3. Harvick does benefit because it's not a 550 horsepower track, and it seems like Stewart-Haas Racing just totally out to lunch with that package. This is not that, so that could help, but still going to be ranked number 5 for me within that second tier. The third tier on FanDuel is William Byron at $9,700 through Tyler Reddick at $8,000. And this is a good tier. And it has guys in both molds. It has lap leaders, or a lap leader at least, and guys who could get you place differential. At the front, you got William Byron. He's starting 3rd, and that'd usually be a tough sell for a guy who is not a key favorite to win, but I think he can lead laps. He finished runner-up here back in 2019. My win simulations like him a lot. They see really good value in him as a bet at 22-1. So I think that he's going to be my big mid-range play this week when I want a 3rd lap leader and don't want to jam in 3 guys at Blaney or higher. I can also just jam in Blaney on up if I want to, but I'm comfortable taking swipes at Byron here because I think he can win. So I was talking about Busch before, I might wind up having more Byron than Busch just because Hendrick has been so much better at Martinsville than Joe Gibbs Racing has outside of Truex. So I think Byron's in a good spot. You do want to be cautious because if he doesn't lead laps and doesn't win, he's going to be a pretty bad play. But I think that that's within his range of outcomes. So if you're looking for upside, I think that Byron does have it. This range also has some good place differential drivers. I think that they're solid when you want to go 2 lap leaders or if you punt and get back up there for your 4th slot. Those guys are Alex Bowman, Kurt Busch, and Matt DiBenedetto. They are starting between 20th and 22nd. They're actually all starting right together. Chris Trabell starting 23rd. You could kind of lump them in here too. But all 3 of Bowman, Busch, and DiBenedetto had a top 10 average running position in a race at Martinsville last year, and Bowman and Busch actually did it twice. DiBenedetto looked really good in Phoenix. He's the lowest salary guy in this range, but Bowman is the guy who I think has the best odds to win this race. So overall, what I would say here is just a good range. Just depends on the type of roster you're trying to build. When you want a 3rd lap leader, I'd go Byron. When you're looking for place differential, I would rank Bowman first, then DiBenedetto and Busch. And if you go super balanced, you could get both Byron and one of those guys if you want to. Chris Trabell is here too. He ran well in Phoenix. This just is not an ideal track for him. He's very similar to Larson, where you kind of want to use these guys on multi-groove tracks. This is not that. So I'll use him, I think, but I will use a lot less of him than the other guys. So this tier also gives us extra incentive to punt in 1 slot so we can get 3 studs and then get back up here for our 4th driver. So again, Byron if you want laps led, then Bowman, DiBenedetto, Busch, the ranking of the place differential guys. And I guess I'd probably put Bell right behind Busch, he's tough for me to rank just because the history's not there at Martinsville. Eric Jones was a great in Martinsville in this car before. JGR not as good at this track, so he does fall a tiny bit behind for me, but like I'm really scared of not having any Chris Trabell, so I'll probably get there still, just not as much as those guys. The value tier on FanDuel is Eric Almirola at $7,700 through Cole Custer at $6,000. It's not the best range, but it's also not the worst. My favorite guy here is Bubba Wallace at $7,000 because he has said flat out that Martinsville is his best and favorite track. He's had since the start of 2019, Bubba Wallace has had a top 12 average riding position 3 times in that span. 2 of them have been this year, including at the Bristol Dirt Race. So it seems like his equipment definitely better this year. That's a good thing because equipment matters everywhere. But the other time before this year was actually at Martinsville in the spring race last year. Finished 11th there, was knocking on the door of a top 10, couldn't quite get there, but finished 11th. He actually won here twice in the Truck Series. Those were his age 19 and age 20 seasons. He is starting 25th, so there's some place differential upside there, and he did run well in Phoenix. He was in the top 10 before they took a risk, they took 2 tires, tried to see if they could get him out front. It did wind up hurting his day, but he had speed there. So I think that Bubba Wallace is a core play for me at $7,000 and someone that I would like to be pretty aggressively overweight on for this week. I will take some stabs at Stewart-Haas Racing despite their bad start to the season. Almirola specifically I like. He's starting back in 31st. He actually was running well in Phoenix, finished 11th, had a 14th place average running position there. He also had an 11th place average running position in Martinsville last year and finished 7th. So he'd be the top guy of the SHR cars. Cole Custer is a solid value option at $6,000. The short flat tracks were his best track type last year. So the biggest issues they've had have been on the higher horsepower tracks. So I'm fine buying back in here and seeing what they do. So I'd rank this tier Wallace 1, Almirola 2, Custer 3. And I think that they are pretty easily the top 3 guys in the value tier for me for this week. As mentioned, though, there are some punting drivers you could consider. The punting tier is Chase Briscoe at $5,700 on down. And if you do want to get back up into the mid-range, you need to punt. And I do think that there are some options here. I could see myself realistically using Chris Buescher, Ryan Preece, and Ross Chastain. Buescher, not good in Phoenix. Both he and Ryan Newman really struggled there. And if not for that, I'd be higher on Buescher because he's been good overall this year. If he winds up getting, I think that he's a guy who gets top 15s pretty consistently. That works for $5,200, even though he's starting in the top 15. So I think he's okay. Phoenix was a minor turnoff for Buescher. Preece is a modified racer, so he has a lot of history at Martinsville. He actually won here back in 2008, so a long time ago. But in that race, he led 265 out of 300 laps. He hasn't been as good here in the Cup Series, but the team overall, JTG Doherty Racing, has had more speed this year. I can get behind Preece. Ross Chastain starting deeper in the pack. He is 27th. He finished 19th in Phoenix. He was okay there, decently competitive 19th. He ran well on the short flat tracks in the Xfinity Series. He's $3,500. So given the salary in the starting spot, I'd probably rank Chastain highest. I have not used him all that much this year, but I think he works here. I'd go Buescher second, then Preece. But I will mix and match here so as to not have too aggressive exposure to any one driver. So I think it's Chastain, Buescher, Preece all work, but not anyone who I want to make a core play as I would Bubba Wallace, Eric Almirola, and guys like that. Let's finish up with my picks to win for the Blue-Emu Maximum Pain Relief 500 on Saturday. As always, just kind of going based on what the win simulations are saying. And they say Joey Logano is the favorite to win. That's not the case at FanDuel Sportsbook, so I'm not, take this with a grain of salt. My model always tends to love Logano. I have to manually downgrade some things to try to sell him a bit more short, but I think Logano will be my pick. Why not? And the guy below $10,000 it likes most is William Byron. And again, a lot of value there from a betting perspective on Byron to win this race. Another guy who I've had to lower him because I think it's a little bit too high on him. But hey, 9% win odds, pretty good. So I think that William Byron, my pick to win below $10,000. That'll wrap things up for this week here on the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast. As mentioned, though, we do have our MLB Q&A coming up later today, and a lot of good stuff here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. So make sure you are subscribed on your podcast platform of choice. And if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, whatever it may be, you can find us there. If you have questions for me, I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you on Saturday night. Hopefully things go well. We'll talk to you once again next week to talk about Richmond. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by numberFire.